Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome in across the continent for another exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. We've got some new faces in the crowd today, including our speaker. And so, if you are joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. Now, as you may know, everything we do goes to our YouTube channel. Welcome in YouTube viewers right now. And so, if you want to watch this program in 3 weeks or 3 years, anytime you're keen, you can share it with your family and friends right there. It's particularly exciting to have you all today for two reasons. Number one, this is the third of our triple header. We started live with scuba diving and coral reefs. We just wrapped up with sustainable futures, and then we get to go to the really different neuroscience topic to wrap up our day. So it really epitomizes what we're all about here as an organization. And two, it marks the eighth program in our epic 10-part series in conjunction with the amazing folks at If Then She Can and Frontiers for Young Minds. So If Then is the greatest agglomeration of resources showcasing the coolest women in STEM on planet Earth. We've done major partnership series with them 2 years in a row. You should check out our whole series here. Check out ifthenshecan.org. There is so much to explore and discover there. And then secondly is Frontiers for Young Minds. So this is where scientists partner with kids just like you to write articles that are accessible to everybody, articles that are interesting and neat on the most cutting edge science in the world. So we want to do this epic partnership in conjunction with both groups this year, and we have been having such a wild ride. I hope you'll tune in for our final two this week. Now, I'm so excited because we're going back to the South, to the jewel of the South in New Orleans with Dr. Liz, who is a only person in the history of Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants that has brain outreach guru in her title. So she's going to talk to us today a little bit about her amazing neuroscience work and a very interesting hobby she gets up to as well that we've also never featured in the program. So if you're as excited as I am, let's buckle up and dive in. Dr. Liz, thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the program.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for tuning in and for having me here to talk to you a little bit today about my research career, the science that I do, and this really fun hobby that I feel like has really shaped the course of my career. So the title of my presentation is going to be Brains and Bruises, How Research and Roller Derby Collided to Shape My Scientific Career. I'm Liz Engler-Shirazi. I'm an assistant professor and If Then ambassador. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I am a professor in the Department of Neurosurgery and Neurology at Tulane University. And my research is in how the nervous system, which composes the brain and the spinal cord, interacts with the immune system, which is a complex system all designed to keep you safe and healthy from germs, bugs, or injuries. And I'm interested in how these two systems work together and what that means for how we think and feel and how our brain grows old. These are just a couple examples of the different projects that I'm working on. I'm going to focus today on one in particular, but I'm happy to speak to some of the others. And then I just want to, at the very top, acknowledge that my research is supported by funds from both Tulane and from the United States government. In addition, I have a number of roles in my job that I absolutely love, and that includes doing events where I talk about science to groups of people just like yourselves. So this is me getting to do my favorite thing as part of my job. And then I'll talk a little bit more about my training history in a little while. So just for a minute, let's talk a little bit about one of my favorite projects that I'm working on today. So as a neuroscientist, I study, again, how the brain works. And I do this using rodents primarily in my field of study. And there are a number of advantages that we have in working with rodents in research. The first is that they are very similar to each other. We're all, as humans, very different, but rodents are very similar. Their genes are very easy to understand. We can change their genes in order to understand how different systems work and what happens when those genes that control certain systems are changed. They are also nice because we're all so different. Things like how much money we make or the school we went to or where we live can really affect how results are in our studies. Whereas mice, they all live in a very similar life environment. And so it allows us to really have clean, simple experiments that ask really fundamental questions about how our bodies work. The other thing that's really important for my research, because I'm interested in how the brain ages, rodents live about 2 to 3 years, whereas humans live about 80 to 100 years. And so it takes a lot less time for us to conduct these experiments and get answers to fundamental questions that we need to discover. I will say there are some disadvantages to working with rodents. Namely, they're not people. And sometimes the things that we discover in rodents don't apply as much to the human condition, in part because of how different all of us humans are. The other thing that is important to note is that sometimes things that happen to humans, like depression or Alzheimer's disease, don't exactly happen the same way in rodents. And so we have to make adjustments for how we ask those questions scientifically. So in spite of those drawbacks, I do want to highlight that research with rodents has the potential to fundamentally explain things that go on in the body. And we make sure that we do this work as ethically and rigorously as we possibly can. Okay, so one of the projects that I'm working on is a project looking at how experience with getting sick across your life might affect the way your brain functions. And this is a large collaboration. There are a number of other scientists who are very smart in their areas of study who are all working on this project with me. And so we've found a number of findings that I won't go into detail here because of the sake of time, but I'm happy to answer questions about later. And these findings suggest that our cells in our brain work differently if we've been exposed to more infections across our lives than others who haven't had as many sicknesses. We also see that the way that we learn and remember information is changed, and the way that the immune system responds is very different. Now, this work is published and freely available. If you would like to learn more about this on your own, you can just type in this title into Google or another browser search, and it will come up and you can read this. And I'm happy to sit down with you and talk more about the details of the studies if you have questions. So definitely email me, because you can get my email from at the end of this presentation, but also from this publication. Okay, so today I'll talk a little more about science in a little bit, but one thing I really love to talk to groups of students about is my career. And one thing that I do in addition to being a scientist is doing roller derby as a hobby. And you might not think that roller derby and research have a lot in common, but I'm going to take you through a few slides to show you some examples where I think there's a lot of overlap. So I'm going to try playing this video. It's just a few minutes. Let me know, Jesse, if there are any problems with it. And if it doesn't work, I'll just provide a link to this video in the chat and I'll explain what it's showing. So let's give it a shot. Okay, are we doing okay? Everyone can see it and hear? Okay, great. So just to summarize what that video is showing, The sport of roller derby is a full contact sport played on roller skates on a flat concrete or wood track. It is, involving about 5 players on each side, with one player scoring the points, that's the jammer, and the other 4 players on their team trying to help their jammer score points or prevent the other team's jammer from getting through the group of people and scoring points against them. It's full contact. It's a great form of exercise, and it's a really wonderful community to be a part of. And it's really influenced how I see my research career. So there are a couple of lessons that I've learned over the course of doing research, but also being a roller derby athlete. And we'll go through each of these in turn. The first one being get low and be comfortable being uncomfortable. So what you'll see from these pictures is that roller derby requires you to be in a perpetual squat for as long as you are playing the game. The reason that we need to be in a squat comes down to physics, right? We are on wheels, and wheels have a lot of ability to slide out from below you. And so when you are in a low squat position, you are inherently more stable on wheels on a slick surface than if you're standing upright. And so for many of us who start roller derby, it's very uncomfortable sitting in a squat for a long period of time. Feel free to try it now, and I think you'll find what I'm talking about in about 20 seconds. Your leg muscles start to burn, your core starts to hurt. And so it can be a bit of an adjustment getting used to staying in this uncomfortable position. But it's a good challenge to overcome. And similarly, in science, we often have to be uncomfortable with that job. So, for example, every day I ask myself questions about how a system works or how a cell is functioning. And I don't really know all the answers, and I have to be able to admit that out loud. And this is harder to do than some people might think. And so part of learning to be a scientist is learning to be okay with the fact that we don't know everything, and that we have to sometimes go and figure it out. Another thing about being a scientist is that sometimes, like anything that we might do, it's hard work, and there might be periods of time where we have to figure things out because we don't know how to do them, and we might not make a lot of progress. Similar things happen whenever you're learning something new. And so there may be periods of time, long periods of time, where an experiment keeps failing, or you can't seem to get something to work that you expect to work, and you just have to keep trying and work through that. Within science, we have a system of what's called peer review. So anytime I get data and I want to share that data with the world, I share that data first with a number of my science peers. They look at that data and they say whether they think the data is good and supports the hypothesis that I was claiming, or if there is more work needed to be able to make the claim. There is a lot of rejection in science. We often have to revise our ideas, revise our approaches, ask questions a different way in order to make sure that when we publish our data, it's the highest quality possible. And so being able to be comfortable with rejection is really important, and it's something that takes a bit of time to learn how to do. As I said before, we're learning how to do things that we may not know how to do, and that can be uncomfortable, and it takes a lot of willpower to move through some of those periods where things aren't working and that you don't feel like you are capable. But I assure you, pushing forward, as Dory in Finding Dory says, right, just keep swimming. I assure you, you get through it with persistence. And lastly, all of science is about data, and we use data to defend our ideas about how the world works. and how the brain functions. And sometimes people challenge those ideas with other data, and we have to be able to defend our ideas constantly. And that's something that can be a challenge, but it takes some practice to overcome. But once you're there, it's not as uncomfortable as it might sound. Okay, I have another video for you to illustrate the next point, which is along your career, you want to always have a plan, but you want to be ready to pivot on a dime whenever necessary. So here is a video of me as a jammer for my team in black. Okay. Okay, so I tried to go around on the outside of the track. I tried to go around on the inside. I got caught up, and I couldn't get past these skaters without pushing for a long time. Okay, so now I'm out and I'm coming back around to score some points, and you'll see I had a plan. I'm trying to go a certain way, and I had to change it right at the last second and go around by grabbing my teammate and swinging to the outside. Okay. Oops. So the point in showing that is that this is sort of the typical career path that someone who wants to be a scientist is gonna take. You first go to college after primary school and secondary school. Then after you graduate college, you pursue graduate studies to earn your PhD. And then for neuroscience in particular, you do what's called a postdoctoral fellowship, which is additional training to expand your knowledge and skills for anywhere between 2 and 4 years. And you might do 1 or 2 of those, depending on what you want to study. And then you can finally become a practicing scientist, and you'll take those positions at universities or companies. So during graduate school, I was really interested in how hormones affect the way that the brain works. And these are hormones, a whole different number of them. I won't ask you to be familiar with each one individually, but the work that I was showing found that certain hormones are good for brain and certain hormones are harmful to the way that the brain works. And I had hoped to stay in this field. Now, along the way, life also happened. So I met my partner and we got married and we had a baby through that time. But unfortunately, the field of studying estrogen and how the brain worked encountered a bit of a barrier. There was a big finding that suggested in humans that estrogens weren't going to be viable treatments for helping the way that the brain ages. And so I decided that I needed to get additional training in a different field in order to stay a scientist. And so, and I should also mention, like at each point, we make career decisions about where we want to be and how we want to see our career progressing. And so after my graduate training, I moved across the country from Arizona all the way to West Virginia, and took up a new job learning new things about the brain. And that's where I began doing my work in how the immune system and the nervous system interact. And this is where I made an initial discovery about how infection affects the way that the brain works and how we learn and remember. So this first study was a bacteria that we were trying to understand. It's not exactly a bacteria, but we used it as a model. And then we also found that this same bacterial approach could affect the way that brains respond to an injury, in this case, a stroke, which is where the brain doesn't get enough blood and oxygen and nutrients, and neurons or brain cells get sick and don't work properly. And this has important implications for what we all experienced when we lived through the pandemic, and how this virus can also affect the way that the brain functions. I do want to highlight that as part of this work, we published a paper in the Frontiers of Young Minds. So if you are interested in reading one or both of these, definitely reach out. They are both readily available online for free. So at this point, I had to make a choice about what career direction I wanted to take. Did I want to become a professor that primarily did research? Did I want to be a professor that primarily was a teacher? Did I want to be a professor that helped other scientists do research? And so one of my choices was to do that by running a facility where we can assess the way that rodents learn, remember, think, and feel and move. The reason that I decided to be a research scientist was around the same time I got a research grant funded. And so I wanted to stay and be a professor at WVU. Unfortunately, right at that time, the pandemic started and most universities stopped hiring for new positions. And so unfortunately, I needed to make a career transition into being a professor. And I couldn't do it at the place that I was. So I got a new job being a professor at Tulane University, which is where I am now. And again, all of this happened during times that were a little bit difficult to be a scientist, right, during the global pandemic. So you have to be willing to be flexible and to take opportunities as they come. I will also highlight that this means that career trajectories aren't always linear. They're not always straight, and sometimes there's some twists and turns and bumps. But again, as long as you're comfortable being uncomfortable, you can take it in stride and definitely make the changes that you need to make to have success in your career. I'll give a little quick comment about embracing the pain, because you can survive anything for almost 2 minutes. So these are just a series of pictures where things are going well when I'm playing Derby, one where things aren't going so well, and the last one where things really aren't going so well, because that person on the ground is me, and it makes it really hard to play Derby effectively. Similarly, this career trajectory, even the straightest and simplest career trajectory, can take a long time. And so embracing that there's going to be some difficulty for a number of years while you learn to do new things, is important. So I'll also say it's important along those career trajectories to say yes to things that scare you, even if you don't want to, because that's where you learn and grow the most. And so these are pictures from the first time I was ever a jammer in roller derby, which is a very scary position because every single person on that track is trying to bump you and knock you down. And so it can be intimidating, but I said yes to this opportunity, and this really showed me that I was a really good jammer, and I still jam for my team to this day. The other example from my research career that I will highlight here is the opportunity that I said yes to give a presentation to a room full of several hundred people about my research. I was really intimidated. This was the first time I had spoken to such a big audience at a big science fair. And I almost said no. But I'm really glad that I did, because even though it took a lot of time and work and I was very nervous, it led to the connections that I made that allowed me to get the job at Tulane that I have now. And if I had said no, I would not be a faculty at this university like I am right now. So I'm really grateful for that opportunity. The last point I'll highlight, if you are alone, you are wrong. Find a friend. This is one of our most important rules in roller derby. You should always be next to somebody because we are stronger together. And so the pictures that I'm showing you are from when I was very new and inexperienced, and the arrow is pointing to me, but you can see I'm not really close to any of the other skaters with black jerseys on. And the red jammer lined up behind me in the seconds between these pictures, plowed into me and knocked me down and separated me from my team. And so I wasn't able to be very effective in preventing that jammer from scoring points. Similarly, in science, this is a team sport. We do all our work together. And you can see that we are stronger together when we do that work. This work is hard. It got a lot going on with it to do a good experiment. And it really does take a team of people working together to make these things happen. So, my advice for you as you embark on your learning journeys is to always leverage the expertise of the people around you. Form those study groups, get into teams, solve problems together, because you're always better with more brains involved. If you can, try and find a mentor, somebody more experienced than you who is doing the job that you want or is going to the college you want to attend, and get their advice. And then there are all kinds of development resources for the career that you would like to pursue. So one that I use a lot is from the American Association for the Advancement of Science. And it's a survey that asks questions about what you want out of your career and what careers might help you get that. The other thing I like to advise folks is always ask for what you need. Never expect that it's just going to come to you. Ask. And there's a couple of books that have really good training for how to do this effectively. I also am, a neuroscientist and mental health researcher. So there may be a need for professional help, life, coaches, mentors, guides. Psychologists can all help support you so that you are not alone in your journey through life and learning. And then lastly, again, my favorite thing about science is getting to recruit more friends through activities like what we're doing today. And so I've just got a few examples of many of the events that we host here in New Orleans and that I've hosted over the course of my career. Teaching people about the brain, neuroscience, and going to college. And then lastly, I just want to highlight, I've managed to recruit not only my daughter into the roller derby community, but also into the science communication community. So you can see a picture of the two of us teaching about neuroscience, the brain, and roller derby amidst all of the statues that the If Then program has made of each of us. So that'll end there and leave time for questions. You can get into contact with me any number of ways. A number of them are listed here. Definitely feel free to email me if you need any scientific papers or you want to talk about findings that you're hearing about. I am absolutely happy to answer any questions and take the time to make sure that you are learning about the things you want to learn about.
Fantastic.
Thanks so much.
Dr. Liz, that was marvelous. And I brought up lizslab.com, so we'll make sure all our classes have that at the end as well. You can check it out right now to keep the excitement going when you're done the broadcast. But we've got a bevy of questions from online, and so we'll dive in with 10 minutes of fun Q&A. The first is about resources around neuroscience or the brain in general. Are there any books specifically you recommend? You highlighted a bunch of book fair and library stuff at the end there. Is there any author that our classrooms could read in high school or even middle school that you would recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to, while I talk, put a couple of options into the chat. So there are a number of neuroscience communicators out there. First and foremost, check out the If Then ambassadors. There are other neuroscientists in the group of people, so not just me, but several others that you can engage with who can talk more about the brain as well. So one person I would recommend is Dr. Leanne Boucher, who is a children's book author and has a number of publications about neuroscience topics for kids. So I'll pull that up. Also, at the University of Washington, Dr. Eric Chundler has a robust neuroscience communication and engagement program. And he's published a couple of books as well as a number of videos teaching about different neuroscience topics. And then Dr. Theanne Griffith, who is at UC Davis, has a whole STEM series called The Magnificent Makers. And I really recommend reading one of those or all of them because they're really fun and engaging. So those are a couple of different individuals that I'd recommend chatting with or engaging with as it relates to neuroscience.
I'll say from my own end, the thing that got me interested in neuroscience as a kid was Oliver Sacks, who is no longer with us, but did some of the most incredible books on the brain, things that can go wrong with the brain, everything about it that you could ever be keen on, and has some really, really spectacular reads you can find at any bookstore. So a whole bevy of cool folks, and we'll make sure to put those in the chat for everyone too, so that's awesome. Dr. Liz, we had a question about roller derby injuries. So it looks like a pretty rough and tumble high contact sport. Is there anything you want to share about how you prevent injuries or maybe injuries you personally had for anyone who's keen to get into it themselves?
Sure. So we take safety very seriously when we play roller derby because you can see it's definitely full contact. So we have a number of minimum requirements as far as safety gear goes. We have knee pads, elbow pads, wrist guards, and then mouth guards and helmets to prevent from a concussion. Or at least minimize the risk substantially. They still happen occasionally. And so in order to try and limit that, the sport of roller derby has a number of rules about how you can contact another skater and with what parts of your body, right? So we cannot trip our fellow skaters. We cannot do that. We cannot hit anybody in the back. We cannot hit anybody with our head or helmet. And so those rules are in place to keep us safe on the track. And so in these situations, injuries tend to be rare. And if they do happen, we always have an EMT, which is an emergency medical technician, on site in order to deliver care if it should be needed. As far as injuries that I myself have sustained, I've definitely fallen on my tailbone and needed to bring a pillow with me for about a week to all my meetings at work. But I think for me, that's the most serious injury. I just bruised my tailbone and my pride.
That's pretty good. If that's all you have, and the bruising pride is just an inevitable thing of everyone we've ever had on the broadcast. So I'm so glad we got that question. And thank you for sharing more things in the chat as we're going along. I can probably find some people too to help if it's tricky to do it on the fly. We had a question about how long you're in school. So you shared this chart and it looks very, very daunting for our kids in grade 4 or 5 to be in school that long. Can you just I have things that I talk about when it comes to this too, but can you speak to why it was worth it, why it's not as daunting as it seems?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I want to be realistic, right? This is a long journey. Getting a PhD is a pursuit. It's a calling. And, like anything's worthwhile, they take time. I can imagine it does seem daunting. I will say, for one, it flies by because when you're doing something that you love, it doesn't really feel like work and the time goes very quickly. I'll also say it's broken up into digestible chunks, right? So your undergraduate studies, seems like a long time, right? It's 4 years, but it's broken up into semesters. And each semester you take a couple of classes that works your way towards that goal. I could relate it similarly to roller derby. When I showed up to try roller derby for the first time, I didn't know how to do anything. I couldn't skate. I couldn't stand upright. I couldn't fall safely. I couldn't stop. And so it was very daunting looking at all of these really expert skaters and wondering, how am I ever going to be able to do those things? And when you break it up and you learn discrete skills over a long period of time, you can look back and really see a big change. Same with learning, right? You break it up, bit by bit. You tackle one obstacle, you overcome, one challenge, you meet one milestone, and then you move on to the next, gradually over time until you're done. So it's definitely achievable and a worthwhile pursuit, even if it is a long one.
No better message than that. I always like to highlight whether it's someone in neuroscience, diving, where you've got people, experts of all stripes on exploring by the seat of your pants. And this, not everyone's going to end up like you with a PhD. If you want to pursue that, fantastic. But even if you do, along that route, you're working with friends, colleagues, you get to work with the coolest people in the world to solve problems for a living. You finish that degree really young with an amazing job that allows you the opportunity to do whatever you want for the rest of your life, which is very, very cool. So I always like to highlight that for kids, is that it seems a little scary. I remember being in grade 6 and thinking, man, 4 years just for a bachelor's degree after grade 12 is a lot. But when you finish it, you honestly, you feel like your life's just beginning. So there's lots of perks to the educational journey if you're so inclined to continue it after high school. Liz, we get this question a lot, and it's, what is your day-by-day job look like? Is it different every day? Is it the same? Can you walk us through what it looks like when you get up in the morning?
Sure. It is a bit cliche, but it can be very different from day to day. It just kind of depends on the experiments that we're doing and the questions that we're trying to ask. So, one experiment might require that I'm there every single day working with mice, mixing chemicals, running tests. And then another experiment, I might just work a little bit and then walk away and not come back for a month until there's something ready to be analyzed. Now, as a professor, my job even looks different than it did when I was a student learning how to be a scientist. My job is very focused on making sure that the people that are learning from me and working with me have the resources that they need. And so I spend a lot of time reading science and papers, which is great. It's just a joy to get to learn every day and that be my whole job. I spend a lot of time writing papers and communicating that science with other scientists and people in the community. And then I spend some time trying to ask for more resources to do the science that we want to do and ask the questions that need to be asked. So it can really vary, but a typical day it doesn't exist. Just depends on the science you're doing and the point in the career that you're at.
A typical day doesn't exist is like a great tagline. We should do that for more of our programs. That's awesome. Liz, time flies and you're having fun. So we're nearing the end of the broadcast. Is there any last message you want to leave our kids with today about the work that you do, places to learn more, anything you'd like to highlight before we say farewell?
Sure. I just want to reiterate my, deep appreciation for this opportunity and getting to talk to you all today. I'm hopeful that what I am doing is resonating with at least some of you, and I really am hopeful that this isn't the end of the conversation. I encourage you, email me, message me, engage with me, and we will embark on a learning journey together. I'm happy to be a part of that process in helping you get to where you want to be and your goals.
Amazing. No better message than that. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, making things work with crazy tech at the beginning there. We really appreciate it, and have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll say farewell to you and our classes. Bye for now, everyone. Check out ifthenSheCan.org.